Okay, so welcome to part 2 of our video on memory. We were talking about time and history and memory and how they're all interconnected. And one of the things we have to ask is, what has time and history got to do with memory? Why is it important? And I think also just what is history and what does it mean? So I want to take a bit of a segue into Winston's position and arguably as a contextual link to Orwell's own propaganda journalism of World War II. Let's remember that he was employed as a journalist to write anti-propaganda against Nazi propaganda, and arguably anti-propaganda is just another form of propaganda, but just the way we manipulate language puts a spin on it, which then, arguably again brings us back to newspeak and the manipulation of language there. But I digress, so let's stick to memory. One of the things that we have in the novel when Winston is reflecting on his job, and we're told in the novel, as soon as all the corrections which happened to be necessary in any particular number of the times had been assembled and collated, that number would be reprinted, the original copy destroyed, and the corrected copy placed on the files in its stead. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs. To every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. Day by day and almost minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. All history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. So in this passage, we've got a few things going on. The really obvious ones, the accumulation here of that just builds upon itself of all the different types of literature and documentation that is being changed. You've also got the repeated sound of that P sound and the hard sounds of the S, and so you've got the sibilance of the S. So it's like this sinister sound to it, as well as this spitting sound from books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, and so it's you got cartoons, tracks, sound. So there's some harsh sounds in there at the same time as this sibilance going through that adds layers to the accumulation, just builds the tension of what is going on here and how questionable it is. And then we have this idea that it's both political and ideological, which we've got just here. And then we bring in this time motif that is throughout the novel, day by day and almost minute by minute. And so that time motif that we were talking about in the previous video is back again. It goes the whole way through this novel. And again, linking, by bringing in time just here, it brings in that link, that undeniable link between memory and time. And of course here, by bringing the past up to date, arguably a paradox. How can the past be up to date? It belongs to the past. It doesn't belong to the current moment. So you get a paradox just there. And then it's confirmed about history. All history was a palimpsest. And I know we have looked at palimpsest in class and what that means. And so we've got this thing that links to what we've said up here about who controls the past, controls the present and the future. Different quote, actually, that I've used up here. But very well, then we, the party, control all records and we control all memories. And we know that because of what's going on here with Winston's job. The memory itself is being controlled here because of the palimpsest. The palimpsest itself is a form of storytelling. It's rewriting the story. And Mark had said to us in that earlier video that we are the shape of our memories. The memories are our stories. So what happens when the story gets changed, when the story is retold? And then what you've got happening is all of a sudden we've got questions about what is reality. And up here, don't forget, O'Brien says reality is not external. It's not external. So what does that mean for us then in terms of existence and reality? Of course, Orwell is a modernist writer, and you can't see me right now, but my hands are going everywhere. I'm gesticulating everywhere because I'm getting very excited. Sorry, everyone. But what we have is Orwell is a modernist writer. He is about questioning. It's some people would argue that it's starting to move into postmodern ideology or thought, and existentialism definitely comes into postmodern questioning. But there is questions here about existence and about reality. What we've got to understand in this text, because of our contextual links to Stalin, people are being vaporized. They don't die. They are vaporized. They are completely and utterly removed. It's not like they were born, lived a life and died, have been executed or whatever. They've been vaporized. They have been disappeared. They never existed. And so what you have in this text is the whole history of Oceania is constantly being rewritten, which arguably tells us that it never existed in the first place. Because the history, so we don't know what is real anymore. And then, so reality itself is becoming manipulated, just as time is manipulated and memory is manipulated, so too is reality. And O'Brien says reality is not external. Okay, it is in the mind. And we know from Winston that apart from a few cubic centimeters in the mind, the party owns it. And then we've got the thought police. That's the whole process of the thought police. They own the mind. They own reality. Reality is what they tell us that it is. And in our video before, Mark was telling us about memory and reality and our perceptions of reality and how memory shapes our understanding of reality and what is real. And so we're then told later in the book, it might very well be that literally every word in the history books, even the things that one accepted without question, was pure fantasy. For all he knew, we're talking about Winston here, for all he knew, there might never have been any such law as the jus prima noctis, or any such creature as a capitalist, or any such garment as a top hat. So here we've got these things that are reality for us, but he's questioning, are they reality? He doesn't know. The history books are telling him that they are, but it's now raising questions about history. And what was the revolution in Oceania? Did it really happen? Are they fighting East Asia? Are they fighting Eurasia? And just who is against who? Is Goldstein real? He's the enemy, but is he real? And so we're starting to get a lot of questions about reality itself, existence itself. And then we get more difficulties because Winston, he says of his own memory, that his memory was not satisfactorily under control. And so he can't control his memory as well. So what does it mean for the historian, the person who documents things? And don't forget, Orwell was anti-propaganda journalist. That was his job. World War II was all about spinning propaganda, manipulating things. We saw the video ourselves in class about the alternate facts that were presented in a more modern regime or political leadership somewhere in the world. We won't discuss it. But, you've got these alter of facts. So how does the historian incorporate the individual human experience and memory into the narrative? And you've got to remember, history is a narrative. It is his story. The word story is in there for a reason. It is a narrative. So you want to talk about who has the dominant discourse. I'm going to add that in there to these notes so that you see it. The dominant discourse is who is writing the history. Who gets to write it? So let's apply it to our own country and to our own history and what we've been taught in Australia. what do you do when the personal testimonies, the stories themselves, the memories of Indigenous Australians about British settlement, or arguably invasion, as a lot of Indigenous Australians would call it, how does that differ to the history that is written and taught in school? Now, in your generation, Year 12, you were starting to learn, you were learning a different history to the one I learned. When I was at school, Australia didn't exist until 1788. There was nothing before that. You learn a different history. And so history itself has changed because the discourse has changed. And in Australia, we have allowed the Indigenous stories to come through, and we're allowing the personal testimonies to come through and the memories of settlement to come through. But what does that say about the history that I was taught, or the history that people even in a generation before me was taught? And so can you see how that the whole way that history is written and who has the dominant discourse gets to control the human experience and identity, because we are shaped by the collective memory and the individual memory. Mark talked about the collective memory and how it shapes the national identity. Arguably, the national identity is in a state of flux at the moment. A lot of people that argue that it is. And that's because we're trying to move forward. We're trying to move forward with reconciliation, trying to move forward with a lot of things. And part of that is recognizing that the history, the very thing that we were taught, was wrong. And it was denying the narrative, the full complexity of the narrative. Then you have the thing of what happens then when the collective memory differs from the personal memory. So I'm going to put it in terms of the Indigenous Australian context. The personal memory, now it's a collective memory, but say, for instance, the personal memory of Indigenous Australians 150, 200 years ago about the coming of British settlers, as opposed to the collective memory of the British settlers who, were bringing in federation and declaring Australia terra nullius for one, and pushing forward with the Constitution and so on. So what we have going on in 1984, we're told Winston remembers the party claiming the helicopter as their invention. That's his individual memory. Julia then, because when they're in their room and they're talking about what they remember, and Julia, remember, is younger, Julia was taught the aeroplane was a party invention. And then we're told one generation more and it would be claiming the steam engine. And so with each passing generation, they're able to change what is being remembered, and they're altering the collective memory. And the individual memory is going against the collective memory. And that's when we've got the problem with Winston, because he says, his memory is not satisfactorily under control, which we have up here. And O'Brien tells Winston that the problem is a defective memory. You are unable to remember real events, and you persuade yourself that you remember other events which never happened. And so O'Brien is actually manipulating Winston, saying your memory is wrong. And the reality is, because we all remember something differently, we will argue with other people that their memory of an event is wrong. And so it goes on. Winston tells Julia, nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I know, of course, that the past is falsified, but it would never be possible for me to prove it, even when I did the falsification myself. After the thing is done, no evidence ever remains. The only evidence is inside my own mind, and I don't know with any certainty